What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of 10X Recruiting brought to you by MetaView. Sile, today we had Matt Stephenson on the pod. And fun fact, I used to be Matt Stephenson's recruiting coordinator when he was a sourcer and I was an RC at Google. I love this conversation. What were your takeaways?
Yeah, great conversation. My takeaway is a bit of a funny one. Well, like one that I feel actually quite frequently, basically, which is when you're hiring talent, especially early in a company, the importance of the actual product. Like we find there are so many cases where actually the main thing you want to do in a recruitment cycle is get someone close to or familiar with the product so that because that's the main thing that's going to excite them. And I think that sort of speaks a lot to, I don't want to get too like macro on it, but almost like this next generation of folks that are coming through, like they much more attached to their work in some ways, detached from it in other ways, but like actually sort of caring about the product they work on, I think is just like higher on the list for these people. And so for us, sometimes it works really well. If you're really excited about changing how hiring gets done, like MetaView is literally like the most compelling company on the planet to work for. Whereas if that's actually not something you've thought a bunch about, you know, I've got our work cut out to get that person excited based on the product. So yeah, that really resonates with me and sort of interesting to hear Matt talk about it as well.
Yeah, I like that one. It's really true, especially as it relates to like providing meaning in your work.
Yeah.
Like if you can't be selling something that you're not like actually into. Mine is this notion around the talent partner 2.0. So I think like a lot of my friends, and I used to feel this way, especially earlier in my career, I used to be thinking about like VC is this like cushy job. You know, you're like operating at like one of these like sick VC firms, you know, you're operating amongst these like investors who are candidly like famous in tech. And it's kind of like cush, like you're on easy street. And Matt basically was like, nope, like that might have been the 1.0 version. The 2.0 version is essentially like you're on call all the time whenever a founder needs you. You need to be responding fast. You need to be making the partners happy. You need to be providing like tangible value to the portfolio founders. And so it's not just like you're in the ivory tower anymore and kind of like preaching down as to what people need to do. Like you need to be in the trenches, especially if you're like working with early stage companies. So I like that one. The other one he said kind of in passing was more around this notion around take homes and how they're getting abused right now. And so I'm a big believer in the take-home process. Like, it's good. It's a great way for a candidate to get used to the product. It's a great way to assess more of their skills. Like, it's either going to serve as like a magnet and bringing them closer or hopefully like a deterrent. But Matt was like, dude, like these take-homes are now being forced so early in the process that actually the only people that are really taking them in those cases are people that actually like we probably don't want. And we're not doing a good enough job of like building the relationship and understanding the dynamics of the candidate and employer thing to where it's like, when do you actually introduce that thing and how do you do it with tact? And right now it's just kind of like people have just completely forgotten how to do that. And it was a good point because like I think I'm seeing that everywhere right now too. So with that, this is one of my favorite conversations with my former sourcer at Google. This is Matt Stephenson. Hope you guys enjoy it. This is 10X Recruiting, a podcast from MetaView. Let's get after it. All right, Matt. So we were like kids at Google together. I think I was a recruiting coordinator and you were like the sourcer that like I was looking up to. Fast forward, now you're at Bain Capital Ventures, like BCV, in one of these like dope VC jobs. What is it that like a VC talent partner actually does?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people have the wrong impression about like these roles, or at least people that have like come to me saying like, hey, I think it's time, I want to go into VC. And so in many places, I think they see it as like a refuge or like a place to kind of slow down and chill for a while. But
yeah,
in my experience, it's been like nearly the opposite of that. And in a way, like, I mean, I've completely signed up for that. But I think like the first question I always ask is like, why now? And then what is this kind of a stepping stone towards for you in your career? And I think that helps me flesh out like what's somebody's like true motivations for like wanting to come into VC. And so I think one of the things I always kind of say is like, I think very valuable prerequisite is like having a stint or two in an early stage company. I think you've seen this like yourself and kind of how beneficial that is to coaching and just being able to kind of relate to founders and what they're going through. But I think for what it is, I think to your question, for folks like earlier in career, I think it can be an amazing place to get a lot of quick reps and really kind of refine the craft of recruiting. You're getting a lot of different founder personalities. You're seeing a lot of different roles. You're seeing a lot of different market trends and getting that insight quickly. I think for senior, like you need to expect to get into the weeds, and you really need to kind of be able to do more than just advise or spit strategy all day long. There's a time and a place for that, but I think that like you really need to be able to roll up your sleeves and get tactical. And so, I think like here's what it is. It's in the absence of a portfolio company not having a talent function, like the founder's problems become your problems. And if you've done a good job, like you are their first phone call, and you just need to be ready for when that's going to be, because it's generally going to be an after hours. It's generally going to be an oh shit moment. It's generally going to be something that like you need to kind of drop everything and help them, do or think through. And I think another part of that is like you really need to match the intensity of where they're at. And so whether that's the stage, whether that's the pace, whether that's their values, like, if they're a 996 culture, like you kind of have to show up in that way, in that mentality. And so, I think that there's kind of a way in which you work that kind of has to flex and adapt to like kind of the environment that you're going into. But then I think lastly, and maybe one of the more difficult ones to nail is like you have to add value both to the partners, but also to the company. And I think those can be two very different things, because I think investing is a game of chess, whereas like what a founder might need right now is like checkers and just trying to tick some things off and get very tactical. And so it's making sure that you're aligning with what the partner wants, in terms of the direction that they see this business going, and making sure that you can kind of influence the founder and kind of get that going in the right motion, and making sure that you can surface any issues like early and often.
Yeah, we're like in the 2.0 talent partner era, right? Like the 1.0 era was like teach them how to fish, and then they sink or swim. I was working with Masha at day one for like the last 8-9 months, and one of her pieces of feedback to me was, Nolan, advice doesn't matter anymore. What really matters is hires. And so you need to be making hires for portfolio companies, because like if you're thinking from the VC firm level, right, what they care about is that one, we're helping portfolio companies win. And then two, we're spinning up the flywheel of founders saying good things about working with us. And advice doesn't meet the bar anymore of like founders saying like, what meets the bar is you've actually made a hire for me.
Right. Right.
And so like it used to be teach them how to fish, but I think those days are generally over.
I think so. I push back a little bit on that, because I do think that there's a time and a place for the advisory actually being the needle mover. And I think, at BCV, we actually have an exec function, which is my colleague Laura, who kind of owns that. And then I own a lot of our tech talent, which is seed and series A. And, what I've even seen is like we've placed a lot of engineers over the last couple of years. But if every engineer is still living out the same Silicon Valley average of like 18 to 24 months, if they're kind of if they're leaving and they're not even coming back to me, if they're making a move, like there's little value that I feel like I've added to that candidate. And I think there's little value that we've added to that portfolio company. Whereas if you make an exec hire, especially, like that's a crazy needle mover. Right. And so I think where we could still do the influence of like teach them how to fish and build the network and make some introductions and make some hires for them is like, if we can really help them kind of like refine that closing strategy, refine that process to where you can get 3-4 more offers that you would have missed otherwise. Like there's definitely still moments in there that I think, can really move the needle and kind of stick with them, but it isn't as obvious. It's just like, we had a 30-minute session to help them teach them how to fish, and then we kind of left them out. It's like, I still want to get in there very deep with them and like, let me listen to your pitch calls. Let me listen to your closing strategy. Let me listen to all this kind of stuff. And like, we'll give you some feedback, right? And founders they need to want that. You can't necessarily just like push that on them, because if they're not ready for it or if they don't value that, like you're just kind of forcing your way and they're not going to listen.
Yep. So seed and series A companies helping with, call it like technical engineering hiring. It's been described to me, which I tend to believe, that's like the worst time to join a company, right? So like if you're not the founder, right? And then you're joining seed or series A, there's either like no product market fit or semblances of product market fit, but there's like super high risk. Generally like comp is lower. Like, how are you advising founders to go and actually close these people? Like, what does it take to win today?
Yeah. A lot of people aren't going to take the bet on you unless you've known them already. And that's just pure fact. And so I think when you see where these founding teams are forming, it's generally not people who have met you over a 30-minute coffee and like decided to take the leap of faith. Even if you think of about it from like an investment standpoint, like we've known these founders before we've invested for multiple years sometimes. And so that's always kind of our starting point with them is like, let's make sure we extract not only your first degree connections, but your second degree connections. And that really kind of has to be the point where if you're going to spend time sourcing, let's spend time sourcing actually from your own network, because that's going to be the lowest hanging fruit. Once you feel like you've exhausted all of that, we can start to unlock a lot of these other channels. But that's the one that I feel like you have to be there and you have to start with. Because when and we will do this with founders, we'll do, outreach and stuff ourselves. But, I was talking to another talent partner the other day at another fund, and they were saying that like their seed stage companies, when they're doing a lot of outbound and a lot of sourcing, it's taking 800 outbound to get one person even to offer stage. That's not even the accept yet. That's just offer stage. And so it's a game of insanely high numbers. And so where we can take that away, play the game that you can.
Yeah. The other thing though is like the many miracles, right? So, one miracle is like you convince somebody to take a call with you because you're super early stage. No one knows who the hell you are. The next miracle is that you have an interview process such that the candidate finds the company, the product, and the team like all interesting enough to keep going. And then the last miracle is this like comp thing. So I feel like things are changing on the comp thing. So I'm running an exec search for a Series A company, head of go-to-market. It's actually, I guess, like a VP of sales role, and it's in New York. And every candidate I'm talking to, like I just pulled the data last night. So the median average OTE is 500 grand for Series A. It feels like that aspect is changing to where like comp is getting pushed higher for early stage companies. So it's like, I wouldn't say de-risked, but like makes more sense from an equation standpoint for me to like, okay, if I'm going to do this, like at least so I can like pay my rent and like go, obviously 500K is like way higher than that. But like, what are you seeing in comp right now? Like what's your word on the street?
For what feels like the first time, like there's been companies that like you just can't compete on comp. Like there is that aspect. You have infinite war chest of money in some of these companies, and they're just going to back the truck up. And so there's a lot of it that even, not to dismiss your question, but there's a lot of it that even comes back to like the unique value proposition that your company can even offer to somebody who wants to join at that stage. Because yeah, you're right. Like it used to kind of be this like, hey, come in here. The company's going to 3X, 4X, 5X. You're going to do great and all this other stuff. Not only is that like, that's still definitely like a selling point, but it's like, when you can go to one of the big labs and just get that in guaranteed cash, it's kind of almost like becomes the new Google versus Facebook, dilemma that we had back in the day. It does become more of a question of motivations. But yeah, no, I think like startups are having to rewrite that playbook. And a lot of those plays right now, I feel like are kind of just like open questions and like they're figuring out what's going to be the winning strategy. We're definitely seeing a lot more companies, companies are raising a lot more money, which means they can bring it on base a little bit more. But then, if the total comp still relies on the equity tripling, quadrupling, 5X, whatever it is, there's still that gap, there's still that question mark, and you need to be able to kind of show the business metrics to back that up. And so I think there's still a lot of that where it's like you're joining an early stage an early stage company. It is a lottery ticket to a certain degree. But yeah, I think like more companies are willing to pay market 90th on base so that people can survive in the Bay Area or survive in New York, the major metros. And then, equity kind of just still becomes, I would say higher from a starting point, but like there, more creativity also with like some of these secondaries and everything else. So you're not feeling like you have to be locked up for 5-10 years. But not all companies are going to advertise that off the bat.
Okay. So super interesting topic that we have not covered on the show is secondaries. Take a minute and explain that to the audience. What is a secondary, and then how are companies deploying it today to win talent?
Yeah. So I think, historically, if you sign up for a company that's private, you need a liquidity event in order to be able to have, to cash out. And that either is an acquisition. Historically, it's been an acquisition or it's been an IPO. The new kind of thing I feel like that's coming up for employee liquidity is this idea of secondaries, which means investors can be putting money into a company to effectively relieve people who want to unload their shares. That might be other investors, but it's also going to be employees. And so that's giving employees the opportunity to sell liquidity at a price that should still be looked at as pretty good. And maybe you are trading it for a bit of a discount, but at the same time, like some people say cash in the bank is worth more than cash on paper or just the certificate, the monopoly money. And so it's allowing people to kind of be able to say like, okay, I don't have to wait 4 or 5 years in order to get this. This can happen, every time a company's raising. Now, there's certain companies who have come forward and are very public that as part of their compensation strategy. There are other companies that, it kind of almost becomes like you were there at the right time. It was a one-time event. It was there to kind of give early employees an event to kind of get liquid and get some cash in the bank. But, no guarantees that this is going to happen going forward. And so that's where I think we still have a little bit of, a question mark as far as like, does this become the standard or the norm?
So yeah, I don't know if I'm supposed to tell the story, but you know me, I'm going to tell the story. So when we were at Carta, we wanted to make employee secondaries regular and normalize it for the industry. So Henry was like way out on the bleeding edge of thinking about this. This is back in 2018. And so when we raised our E, we did a tender to where like we allowed new demand to come in and the supply to be sold from employee liquidity. And so Henry was like, we're going to do this every 12 months. And at that time, Charlie and I, the CFO, were like, well, like we should probably like be a little thoughtful about the language. Like I love the intent, but like, and you're like, no, every 12 months. And then when COVID happened and there was no demand for any startup equity, we had to walk that back and people were super pissed about it. But I still think the intent was really good. And I think actually very healthy for the ecosystem. So the way that we designed it at Carta was like, we allowed people who they'd had to have been there for, I think it was like at least 18 months. And they could sell somewhere between like 10 and 20% of their shares. Right. So they still had like a significant amount in the bank. They still had a significant amount that would be continuing to vest, but they could basically like kind of like relieve the pressure valve and get some liquidity. I think that this is an underused lever for early stage companies, especially ones that are growing insanely fast. Because like you and I know, being on the other side of the table in VC, how often founders are doing this without letting employees participate.
Right.
And so, like, do you think that this is going to be a bigger trend moving forward?
I hope it is. I do hope it is. Because I think as we're seeing the IPO windows get longer and longer as well, and that doesn't just impact employees, that also impacts investors and LPs getting returns and all that kind of stuff. It does beg the question as to, how long am I able to think about this from like a quality of life perspective, right? Like if I think about like my last couple of moves, like I'm super locked up, right? And I have no idea when this money's going to hit, but like I hope it hits someday, but it would be really nice to kind of have this like predictability that like, yes, I don't need to go and like unload like all of my shares. So those employers kind of designing the mechanism of like, yeah, we still want people bought into the company. Like you can unload 20% of your shares or whatever that is. I think that's really good. I think that's really healthy. I think it gives the breathing room. And that's kind of like, where founders get that too, is like, let's just help them kind of like take some of the stress off the table and get them kind of like what they need in order to kind of just like be locked in on work right now and not be stressing about like, whatever that might be, sending your kid to the next travel tournament or whatever, right? Like, yeah. So I think I really do hope this becomes like a more normal thing, but there's a lot of complexity around it as well.
Yeah. I always say like life is about trade-offs, right? And so if you decide to go work for an early stage company, typically one of the trade-offs that you're making is like, you could go make more money elsewhere. The challenge now, though, is like with some of these labs and with some of these like .AIs that are growing so fast, is like employee liquidity is now becoming part of like the value proposition that they're pitching. So this is the new game on the field. And, if you think about it, it's like, with optionality comes power for employees. And it's not for everybody, but it is like, this upper echelon is starting to get smart enough to ask these questions. I was just talking to an exec candidate about this yesterday. They're interviewing a Cursor. Cursor is like a super high growing, super high valuation company. And I asked that question. I was like, well, what's their plan for tenders? And he's like, I don't know. I'm like, you should ask. Like, that's especially going to work at that company. Like, because I think it's going to be part of the deal now, that founders have to have an answer to. On the topic of like, crazy hot market, .ai companies everywhere, it does feel like there's a constraint in the recruiting market. So I had Evan Connor on recently, who's at Ambience, and he and I had this discussion, and it's like one of the hardest roles to hire for. It literally now on a daily basis, I'm getting founders pinging me saying, hey, do you know any recruiters? So what is going on here? Why is there such a constraint?
Yeah. So I think three things have happened in the last couple of years that are kind of leading to this. The first one, I think first we have to acknowledge where we are right now, and then what we all just went through, which I think recruiting's been like an absolute whipsaw over the last 2, maybe 3 years. And so I think, when you have teams that are getting cut in mass, or you have recruiters that have lasted 5 or 6 rounds of layoffs only to then finally get caught up, and I feel like, and then you have like the big companies that start cutting in masses. Like it just started feeling like nowhere was safe.
They're still doing it. They're
still doing it just quietly.
Dude, that actually is so under discussed. I talked to a mutual friend who you definitely know, who just happened to go through one of these. They're just now doing it in very, very small batches and very quietly, so the press doesn't pick up on it.
That's right. So I think we have to learn, like this has led to like a lot of broken trust and a lot of skepticism across recruiters. And kind of to what I was saying earlier, about like, how do the founding engineers find, the founders that are going to take that bet? Every time that I find a founding recruiter that I talk to, I ask them how they got connected with that company. And almost 80% of the time, it's because they worked with that founder in another life. And so there's still a trend where like people are following people, and that's helping de-risk the situation before they just enter and take this wild bet. And so, I definitely have to remind founders that like, recruiting has definitely been this like, it's been a seesaw, it's been a whipsaw, whatever you want to call it. It has not been pretty for us. And like, we have to make sure we treat the talent pool here with kind of like that level of both like, respect, but also I think like already knowing that recruiters are incredibly risk averse, which is, I think, horribly ironic. It's so funny. It's just made them more risk averse, right? And so like, let's acknowledge that as like point number one. Point number two, I think between the pandemic, the limbo of companies kind of like coming back with their RTO plans, a lot of recruiters have fled the major metros, and yourself is a perfect example of this, right? Especially at the more senior levels, they have families, they're starting to kind of just like want to settle down a little bit. And so in this wave of new startups that we have, the 4 to 5 day office thing is real. And there are people who are just like, I'm self-selecting out of that. And so you're already taking a market pool that was like fairly small to begin with and making it even smaller. And so I think that's like another like big challenge. I don't know if some of these recruiters who are unwilling to like make those sacrifices of like coming into an office 4 to 5 days a week, like kind of realize that they could be trading off potential like huge companies and huge exits. But there's definitely like, you get to the point where it's like more of a quality of life conversation than anything else. And then 3, I think especially true of the early stage, like the role of a recruiter is changing, and there's no kind of denying it. I think leaner teams are challenging the use of new tools, new ideas, and ways that require like a mindset shift rather than like previous kind of big movements that we've seen. And so, what I've continually heard from founders that both either have recruiting teams or have been interviewing recruiters, is they'll come back to us and be like, I just don't feel like they're creative enough. And, there's kind of this like open question. And so, I start going in, I diagnose that a little bit further, and I start to find that like, okay, all the typical tactics are being deployed. But when you try to, if it's just like driving referrals and they're sifting through inbound and they have a large majority of their time going to sourcing and outbound, you're kind of just swimming in a sea where, especially even AI and AI outreach and like all these other things have just like made this a really murky and kind of crowded kind of pool. And I don't feel like there's anything that's like differentiated or sticking out about that. And so I think like there's definitely kind of this like a cry to like have to like adapt to this new reality that we're in terms of just like it's like the 2016 growth hacker. Like, I think like that was like the old version of like a cracked engineer, right? If you think about it, it's just like just running rapid experiments to figure out like what works for the product and SEO and try to find the pockets of what's sticking and just like being okay, like failing fast, but just doing that in like really strong alignment with your founders. And just like not leaving anything on the table. And so I think like there's kind of this like perfect storm, I feel like that's happening, in which like we have super risk averse market. We have people who have just like fled the market altogether. And then we have this like this kind of more old school way of thinking about it, where it's just like I sit at a desk and I recruit all day long, but really it's just going to get it back to like getting out there and trying a whole bunch of new things to try to compete.
Yeah, that third point I think is actually true for almost every function right now. Like marketing really comes to mind. Like the marketing tactics of the last 10 years do not work anymore. Most recently, it's like last week, Google changed their search results from like being able to have like 100 per page to 10. And that like Reddit's stock price dropped 15% because now like they're not coming up as much.
Right.
And so like things are changing super, super fast. And it does feel like the creativity aspect is missing. You know, I'm actually experiencing this as like a podcast host in the space, and I'm trying to get people to talk about stuff. And when I reach out to some people, I'm like, you know, I just like I did with you, like we're going to do a prep. We're going to figure out like what's some shit we're going to talk about that's novel. And it's tough to like get people to talk about what they're experimenting on because they're not. So like, what is working? Like, what experiments are you seeing? You had mentioned one like right before we jumped on about this like, you know, crazy recruiter who's doing stuff with clay and stuff. What's the story with that?
Yeah. So, I feel like, I mean, we're still in a world in which I feel like a lot of these AI tools are very fragmented when it comes to the recruiting landscape. And we're seeing this change incredibly quickly with like things that are kind of just getting integrated or getting bundled. And I'm excited for the future of that. But yeah, I think like right now, like if you're not experimenting, you're definitely falling behind. And I think that's just like period, full stop. And so one of the things I feel like this is a super hacky example of this, but you have all these different plugins and all these different tools where you can have, you know, exporting people off of LinkedIn using tools like Phantom Buster. And then they're using Clay or tools like this for enriching that data. And then you have Claude that can plug into Clay that you can run a bunch of queries on and start building these like, you know, help me take the first pass of these and make sure it has like all of these different requirements, and it can really get into the different profile details. And then that just leaves you basically having an automated sourcer that's doing it in some cases a lot better than some of the AI sourcing tools that are out there, but it's just a way to give you leverage. And I think, I think that's one of the major areas that you can you know, recruiters are having to take on a lot more different roles or different rec loads or whatever that might be. When we can have these autonomous kind of agents working for us, I think it actually creates a bigger opportunity for recruiters to be more of a business partner. We've always talked about that. The best ones are the business partners, but I think more now than ever, because I don't know if you're seeing this too, but like, I think I'm seeing HR and people ops roles kind of get deferred or get deprioritized to the point where there is a big gap within organizations. And if recruiting can help fill that gap from just even like what Viet was talking about last week on, you know, how do you help your interviewers? How do you identify your top interviewers and get better? Like I'd rather spend 4 hours there than 4 hours on LinkedIn trying to manually sift through a search and trying to find 20 new profiles, right? And so like I think there's a lot of recruiters that are kind of just like getting out there and helping the technology like work for them. Rather than just doing the simple kind of refinements. And those are the companies I'm seeing that are kind of winning and doing a lot more with less.
Yeah, I think that the delta for like why people are, I've been thinking a lot about this. And like at first I was pissed and I'm like, why can't I find people who are doing cool shit? Then I was like, no, I know why they can't. Like what the reason they can't is because they're buried, right? Their expectations on like what they're doing, right? Like teams have been cut, right? And expectations have gone up. And then meanwhile is like insert recruiter trying to like figure this shit out. And so they're just playing defense all day long. And I think what needs to happen with these people is like, they need to have an earnest conversation with whoever their boss is, ideally like getting as close to the founder or CEO as possible, saying like, we need to like, what we've been doing is not working to the level that we expect. In order for us to figure something out, we're going to need to experiment. Part of experimentation is I'm going to do shit that's not going to work. And we just have to be okay with like us taking as many swings at this thing as possible. But I need to spend 10% of my week, 15% of my week on experimentation. Otherwise, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result.
Yep.
That's what has to happen.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the ones that I've seen doing this well are in lockstep. Like they are the founder and the recruiter are both on the same page of just doing these like wacky, wild ideas, growing a social presence, starting an X profile, getting out there, just like doing some like, it goes back to like these older tactics that you and I experienced like a decade ago, I feel like, where it's just like, let's get out in the community, let's get people in person, let's just build, get our logo in front of as many places and as many people as we possibly can and play the long game. There's a strategy in that as well. And so I think, I definitely think that that's something that we're seeing working. The other ones where I see it's not working is when exactly what you just described, and which is like the Spider-Man meme where everybody's pointing fingers at like why it's not working. And it's like, it's like, I love kind of coming in those situations because you're just like the mediator, like guys, like you're not working together, right? Like there's a partnership here that needs to be true. And like, you have to just come up with a plan and like know that plan may not work and be okay with that. Like, what are we willing to risk? What are we willing not to risk? Okay, let's put that down like on paper and go execute. And so, I think
take a beat to talk about that though. So we talked about like what a talent partner does. So like, let's go back to like Nolan when he was 26 at DoorDash, and Tony just like, thought DoorDash is the best company on planet Earth. Like, why wouldn't everybody want to come work here? Meanwhile, like, Uber has more money than God. TK was still working there. Postmates was like taking scandalous pictures of the Kardashians, and everyone knew what Postmates was. And meanwhile, they're like, who the fuck is DoorDash?
Right.
And I could not get it through his head that like, no, like it's not easy for us. Like we have to do things that are much harder. And so what I ended up doing is, I called Brett at Sequoia, who was running Sequoia's talent team at the time. And I was like, dude, I need your help. Like, and I think this is something that, for whatever reason, like our profession, we don't ask for help very often, because I think this is a very common problem. Like founders think it's their baby. Like I got my kids behind me right now. I'm never going to tell you one of these kids is ugly, but like we all have imperfections. Right. And so like, isn't that a way that actually a portfolio recruiter can leverage you to help like bridge the divide?
Yeah, 100%. And I think one of the things I have to do is just take a very objective lens on it. Right. Of just like, let's lay out the facts, and let's take the information that we have and kind of put together what either might be a hypothesis or what might be, hey, here's what we're seeing other companies are doing that they've had success with, but also just have to acknowledge that like what works for one company is not going to work for all, but that doesn't mean you can't try it. And like, go experiment, go do it. But you're absolutely right. I think, and these like, especially these first recruiter roles, it's like a very lonely place to be. And so you need that phone a friend network to be able to kind of just like, hey, I'm going through something right now. I really need your help. And frankly, like that's largely a motivation of why I got into this, is because I didn't feel like I had that level of support. And I was like, I always just wanted to feel like I could add more value, like, and like really help the people out that need it most. And so, yeah, when you're struggling through the trenches of like this, I call it the startup desert, there's kind of a place that we can kind of take an outside look and just help out and see where we can add some support there.
Try and find some water. Okay. So you had sent me a text last week around like winning in like this ground game. Like, what did you mean by that? And like, what are you thinking about with like winning talent right now?
Yeah. So I kind of, it's like an extension of the conversation we were just having. So, something I'm seeing a lot in these companies that are growing insanely fast and the scale and the speed, they're sacrificing, they're putting these like, coding assessments in place, or they're relying a lot on take-home exercises. And really they're kind of finding ways for like interview hours to not be spent or like not waste those cycles. And what I actually think that's doing is, you're not creating a great candidate experience. You're asking candidates to do 3 hours, 4 hours of work before you've even spent more than 30, 45 minutes with them. And so, and I do find that these companies, unless you have like some crazy brand cachet, or like, again, you have that arsenal, that war chest, these are the companies that are struggling most, and they just don't understand why. And it's like, well, you're actually like not putting the work in that's required to win in this race. And so, I think the ones that I've seen that I've seen being successful and doing incredibly well are companies that are truly prioritizing this in-person experience. And not only during the interview process, but also like recognizing that this is a very long game and every conversation can lead to a fan of your company. And, if somebody says they're not looking now, like 6 months from now, 8 months from now, like something can change very easily in these companies and they come back knocking. If you can leave these positive impressions, it's tried and true recruiting. It's tried and true sourcing, if you think about it. It's like building a true passive candidate network. And so like Amina was talking about this, even when you had her on talking about what Vercel does with these leadership dinners, it's stuff that you feel like doesn't have immediate value, but long-term it really stacks. It really compounds. And I think it really matters. And so I think, putting together incredibly well thought out interview loops, designs, experiences, like this is the thing. I think when somebody shows up and you're like, hey, like this company doesn't have the valuation or the funding raise as a cursor or something like that. But like every single person I met, I was incredibly impressed by. The process was exactly what they explained to me, how it was going to go. And I like felt like I just like connected even more with the company as I went through it. Like that's how you win. Like these are the people that want to work with incredibly strong people and see kind of upside in these companies. It's old school, like great candidate experience. I feel like this is, it's nothing novel, but I feel like this is where I've seen just pay off time and time again.
Yeah, I think candidate experience is the wrong term. Like, I actually think it's relationship building. So I say this all the time, right? This is Nolan's soapbox. It's like the 3 most important things in life: who you marry, where you live, what you do for work. And under that third bucket is like the number one thing is like, who are you working with? Like the reason you and I are homies is because we were in the fucking trenches together, like for a long time. Like, and that builds relationships. And so like when you're interviewing, it's a really interesting take, Matt, because I have been probably the biggest proponent of instituting more work for candidates and to try and make the interview process as simulative as possible so both sides know what they're getting into. But actually what you're saying is, I think probably like the pendulum swinging too far to where people are now like, oh yeah, like they need, like I've heard Nolan say this, like they need to go do that thing. And it's like, well, you haven't earned the right to ask them to do that work because you haven't built a relationship with them. You don't understand like what are their 3 non-negotiables, like the most important things that they're optimizing for. You don't know, like, are they warm? Are they actively looking? Did you hook them when they were cold? And then all of a sudden you're putting this shit in front of them, which like is like a complete, like it's like a debauchery of a relationship with another human. And I do feel like in the era of AI, there is this moment for humans, like, and there's this alpha for humans to understand and truly listen to what someone else is saying and to translate that into a bespoke experience for them to try and win them. And then the last point, which is like, even if you don't win them now, even if they never become an employee at the company, isn't that like a relationship that you could potentially get value out of in the future?
Right.
People just don't think that way.
I keep in touch with a lot of my declines. Like, you have to.
Me too.
I mean, this is such a long game because I wasn't thinking about it from just the company that I was at. I was thinking about it in terms of like, this is going to be a 20-year relationship, right? And they'll hit me up, I'll hit them up, whatever it is. But yeah, and they become a fan of your company. They can refer. I mean, some of them did refer people who I ended up hiring. And like, there's ways that you can do this to like multiply it, not look at it just from like a pure transactional standpoint. And so, yeah, leveraging all of the different things, game nights, dinners, events, rent out a bar, just bring a bunch of people to it. Like it's, old school tactics.
So I won't steal her thunder because I'm trying to get her on the pod, and I won't drop her name yet because she probably won't appreciate me stealing this from her. But on transactions, I was talking to this amazing recruiting leader recently, and she said something that blew me away. She said, people are always worried about like being transactional, but they're not thinking about how transactions compound. And so, for example, in recruiting, the transaction we're typically having is phone calls with candidates, right? And if you can actually compound those and make them work for you, right, by playing the infinite game with humans and relationships, all of a sudden you're going to look back after 5 to 10 years and have this unbelievable network of relationships to when you need something, you can go ask for help. And I think that's the thing that like a lot of the early stage stuff is missing for me right now. It is transactional because it's like, can you do something for me today? Versus like more of the long game thinking, which is like, hey, even if it doesn't work out right now, like we're going to figure out a way to help each other in the future. That's the way that I've started to think about stuff as I've aged.
Yeah. We have a founder actually right now. It's a seed stage company, still pretty stealth. to the point where the response rate's not been great, right? We're still early days, but the response rate not been great. And I said, it's a product-led growth company. I said, let's not even talk about recruiting in your outreach at all. You're not assembling a founding team. You're building something and you want their eyes on it and you want to talk about it. And that's true, because if the conversation, goes well, you could start learning a little bit more about them as they're giving you product feedback. But if it doesn't, if it's not the right time or whatever it is, like, you still have a touch point, you still have a potential customer, and he's like, yeah, this is actually a really good way to think about it. I was like, you just need reps. It's like sales cycles in a way. And so we're almost just like, we're not even recruiting anymore. We're just trying to get people to see the product, and we're going to see where that goes. But it's like, to that same point, it's like, don't think about this necessarily as like, I have a role, I need to fill this now. It's going to be a much longer game than that. And so think about
it's like me in high school. Like the worst thing I could have done when interacting with girls was like, hey, do you want to be my girlfriend, as like the first interaction? Like, that doesn't like, you got to go build, like, you got to go lay some foundation, like, you got to build some rapport. And I love that. That's actually a great hook. One of the things that I wish I would have done earlier in my career is ask for more help. And I was trying to play hero ball and solve all the problems by myself. And it turns out like other people actually like really want to help you. I'd say 90 out of 100 times when people ask me for help on LinkedIn, I try and help in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's like a great, which is like, hey, can you come like give me some feedback on my product? Like, that is such a orthogonal way of like starting with the first problem, which can I get that person on the phone, as opposed to starting with the end game in mind, which is like, will you come work here?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Like the days of AI sourcing, especially, is like, it's not about finding candidates. Like, it's always been an engagement challenge, but more than ever, can you get in front of this person? And then once you have that shot, like, if you can't convert them now, what's your longer term strategy? Like, we have a founder who comes to all of our events, and he's always just like, these are the best events I've ever put on. My list of my dream team is growing because of the people that I meet here. Like, the fact that he's even keeping that list, and I'm like, you're doing this right. Like, you already know who you want to hire, and you're keeping in touch with them. You have a regular cadence of checking in with them, coffee chats, whatever it is on the calendar. Like, you're playing the long game, and that's going to pay off.
Yep. That is the future of recruiting. Matt, where can people find you?
Mostly on LinkedIn. I guess that's the place I'm getting more active.
and then in our, direct thread to where you're sending me hate messages about what you're seeing in the market.
Yeah, that's a very fun text relationship I have with you, and I always appreciate your contrarian takes. You're actually, honestly, like, you're always the guy that I know will have like maybe a different view on this, and so it's always the one thing I'll bounce off of you first. So I always appreciate that.
Thanks for coming on, brother. I appreciate you.
All right, thanks, Nolan.